All right, so this is an example of pulling information using Microsoft Power Automate from Managebac's API. And so the first thing you'll want to do is you want to create a flow and choose manually trigger a flow. And then you'll want to add an action and choose HTTP. Now HTTP is a premium feature and it's only available if you have a per user plan. But with that plan, it's $15 a month. With that plan, you get things like HTTP requests, but you also get the ability to automate converting Word documents into PDFs. And there's a lot of really great features. But if you don't have a per user plan, you can sign up for a 90-day trial for free as soon as you add this action to your Power Automate. And so in that 90 days, you'll be able to determine if this feature is worth purchasing. Okay, so now that I've added my HTTP, I'll want to choose get, and then I'll add the URL for the Managebac API. So mine's api.managebac.cn because I'm located in China. That's version 2. And then I put teachers, and then question mark, and then everything after the question mark tells them, you know, how many per page I want and how many pages or which page I want to get first. And so I put per page 100 and page equals 1. Here you'll put auth token for the header, and then here you'll put your token, and you'll get that from going to settings and integrations in Managebac and creating a new token. So what I'll do is I'll save this and I'll run it just like this. And then what that'll do is that'll give me the JSON information for this HTTP request, and then I'll copy that information and use that in a separate flow. Okay, so I've run that and I have my other flow over here. And what I'm going to do is I'll go to parse JSON and I'll do generate from sample, and I'll paste the information into this box that came from that HTTP request that I did. And then when I press done, it'll actually generate the schema for that JSON automatically. And so I don't have to do anything else. So if you run this, just keep it available. And then when we get to this step, you can just do generate from sample, paste, and it'll automatically generate the schema for you. Okay, so the next thing you'll want to do is make another flow, and you'll choose schedule a flow. Now, because Managebac teacher data doesn't change very often, I've scheduled this flow for once per month. So the next thing you'll do is add an action and choose list rows present in a table. Now, I've created an Excel document in OneDrive for Business, and you'll choose document library OneDrive, and then you'll choose file. Now, the reason I keep everything in OneDrive is because I pull this information into Power BI, and because it's located on the web using my Office account information, I can refresh my Power BI dashboards up to 8 times a day. And so each time this refreshes, it'll automatically refresh also in Power BI, again, up to 8 times a day. And so I've put this under Power BI Managebac and Managebac Other. So there's a workbook called Managebac Other. And in that workbook, I have things like all the teachers in Managebac, all the terms. It's just very little data, and I didn't see the point in making a new workbook for each of those. So I made a workbook for all of the API requests that are relatively small. So then I have teachers as my table. The next thing I want to do is add another action, and I'm going to choose delete a row. Now, the reason for this is that when you run this once a month, it's going to populate the table the first time. But then the second time, you don't want there to be duplicate data. So you'll want to delete all the rows in the table and then repopulate that table with fresh data from Managebac. So when I add an action and choose delete a row, I'll choose key column as ID. That's my first column in the table. And then for key value, I'll choose ID from list rows present in a table up here. That'll automatically add this apply to each. So for each row it finds, it will compare the ID to the ID here, and it will delete that row. Something really important that you also want to do is go to list rows present in a table and choose settings. Turn on pagination. So even though there's only about 2 or sorry, there's only about 500 teachers on Managebac. I set the threshold to 1,000. So turn on pagination and then increase this number above the number of teachers that you have on Managebac. Okay, the next thing you want to do is add an action and choose initialize variable. And then you want to name this variable. I just called it var page for variable page. And then I'll choose type integer and then add a value of 1. So that means that the starting page number is going to be 1. Next, I'll want to add another action and choose do until. And then so what's going to happen is I'm going to add var page here from my variables earlier, and I'm going to choose is greater than 5. Now sometimes when you add var page here, it won't give you is greater than. And so if you just click edit in advanced mode and then edit in basic mode, it'll give you this drop down box here. And so I'm going to put is greater than 5 because I know from my previous run here that there's a total number of 5 pages because it'll give you that information after you run this. And so var page is greater than 5, and it will keep cycling through this or looping through this until it completes, until var page increases to 5. So the next thing that you'll want to do is add an HTTP request, choose get, and then add the same URL as before, except where page equals 1, you'll put page equals var page. And so var page initially is 1, and so the first time you run this, it will see, okay, I'm going to go to this link, and I'm going to look for non-archived teachers. I'm going to pull 100 records per page, and the first page is going to be 1. And then here you have your auth token, and then here you paste your token for Managebac. So the next thing you'll do is you'll go to content, you'll add parse JSON, and then go to content, and then add body. And then here you'll generate the schema from the sample from the previous request that we did. Next, you'll want to add a row into a table. And when you add an action for add a row into a table, you'll choose that same table. So OneDrive for Business, OneDrive, your file location, and then the table, teachers. So this is the same table that we initially listed rows, and also the same table that we deleted the rows earlier. Now what we'll do is we'll go here and add ID from the JSON. And then what that'll do is that'll automatically add this apply to each. And then from there, it's just plugging in all the columns in your table. So I have the teacher's email address, the teacher's first name, last name, whether or not they're archived or not. I tried to pull all the teachers that were not archived, but for some reason Managebac didn't pick up that request, and it just pulled all 500 teachers who have been archived or not. But regardless of that, if you add archived from this, you could also search here. If you add archived from this, it'll allow you to filter that in Power BI, so it's not a big issue. So if you add archived, it'll give you a true or false, and you could just filter out all the true. Gender, if it's available, and then role. So are they an admin, are they an advisor, and so on. Okay. So the next thing you'll want to do is here under increment variable, you'll go to add an action, and then just search increment variable. So increment variable. And you'll find your variable from earlier, var page, and you'll just put 1. So what happens is, if we go through this again, is every month at a particular time here, it will trigger this flow automatically. Then it'll list all the rows present in our teacher table. Then it'll go through all of those rows and delete them ID by ID, comparing them here. Then it'll initialize a variable called var page, and it will do all of these actions until var page is greater than 5. So var page starts at 1, and it will send an HTTP request with page of 1. Then it'll parse the JSON from that request, and add a new row to the table from before. And then when it finishes that, it will increase var page by 1, and then it'll go back all the way to the top, and it will do page equals 2 and page equals 3 and so on until it finishes. Now, what I've done here is I've added send an email, and so I can add an action, send an email, and then what I want to do is I want to go to configure run after. And so if any of these up top have failed or skipped or timed out, I just want to send an email to myself. And then so my subject line is Managebac get teachers failed. And in the body, it just says Managebac get teachers failed. So I know that that failed. And then what I can do is I can come back to this flow and look at my run history to see why it failed. Now, the first time it's definitely going to fail, and I'll explain why. When it's list rows present in a table and there are no rows present, but then it tries to delete, this will fail the very first time. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to go here and choose configure run after. And list rows present in a table is successful, has failed, is skipped, or has timed out. Just run it anyway. And then the same thing down here. So we've, yes, okay, it's there. And then under initialize variable, same thing. So we go to configure run after, and if it's failed or skipped or has timed out or is successful, just run this anyway. And then what will happen is everything else will run as a result of that. And so if there are no rows in the table, and if it can't delete any rows in the table, it'll continue to run the flow. So the first time it will send an email and it'll say, oh, something failed. But for all the other ones, you shouldn't have any more problems with that. It shouldn't fail at all, so you shouldn't receive any more emails. And that's it. And then that's just how to cycle through pages using the Managebac API to get Managebac teacher data. And the same process is applicable to students and pretty much anything else related to the Managebac API.